Hi all, I have another very interesting game to show you from the US Chess Championship. Alexander Shabalov was playing Wesley So. He had the white pieces. He kicked off with knight f3, so this is in round 7. Wesley So played d5, after d4 knight f6. So very classical so far, just occupying the center, keeping a grip on key central squares. c4, and we see the Slav defense, which is all the rage. So after knight c3, this triangle is set up. The Slav's personality can vary from being quite quiet to being very, very aggressive, depending on the variations within it. Now, in this game, we see one of the more aggressive ideas that white has at his disposal. Bishop g5, we see an immediate h6, kicking the bishop. Quite often, bishop takes f6 is played here, but in this game, this is also popular. As a move, bishop h4 was played. D takes c4. So white is sacrificing a pawn in this variation to kind of encourage some dark square weaknesses from black, and also this quick e4 and maybe even d5 later. So it's an aggressive idea. e4. Black now responds with g5. Bishop g3, and black can cling on to the pawn, which is what Wesley does. b5. So now we have bishop e2, bishop b7. This bishop wants to be liberated on this diagonal a bit with a later c5 potentially. Now queen c2, not rushing to castle. White has quite a clever idea now, just going for a quick d5. By moving the queen, he's vacating d1, and he wants to play for a quick d5 to break up black's pawns and maybe expose more the light squares, the light square potential weaknesses in black's position. We see knight bd7, rook d1. So this d5 seems quite thematic and quite a rare bird move here is played. Knight h5. So it's kind of inviting this d5. That's kind of a scary thing to do. Black's idea is to compensate for his dark square weaknesses by getting rid of this dark square bishop and then fianchettoing, and hopefully surviving the tactical pressure down this d file. But yeah, white plays now d5 immediately, so both sides not casting before these operations. You might think this is a bit strange. Now Wesley takes with his c pawn, and that does leave the b pawn on praise, but on knight takes, there's queen a5 check here, and that's okay for black. So we see for the moment e takes d5, and one advantage of this whole d5 break is that it is weakening potentially that f5 square as well as other light square weaknesses. So after e takes d5, yes, the f5 square has been slightly compromised here. Knight takes d5, and if white got another go here, queen e4 check is on the cards, and if bishop e7, knight f6 potentially is good for things like queen takes b7. So this is quite a dangerous position. Knight takes g3 is played. After hg, yes, although queen e4 check is on the cards, Wesley calmly plays bishop g7, inviting it. It's not so harmful here. Bishop g7 is multi-purpose. It's indirectly defending the g-pawn because the rook is now protected by the bishop. So there's no knight takes g5 in variations. Well, there's also queen takes g5 as well. But it's covering the dark squares anyway. But it is kind of allowing potentially queen e4 check. But that's harmless here in this position. The king could just go to f8, and white's gone into a self-pin. For the moment, this I believe is a very, very good move in terms of pinning knight e3. It keeps a pin on d7, but also very logical, it would seem, for a knight to go to f5 in this position. So it looks like quite a dangerous position indeed. Now we see this check. Now here, if queen d2, perhaps black can just castle queenside after queen takes, rook takes or king takes. Just castling queenside is good. So we see king f1, and this is potentially a precarious position But after knight f6, I think some overexcitement came in here, because white is actually better on the light squares. This d5 break has actually achieved breaking up, especially the f5 square. The f5 square for a knight, it's been said it's Kasparov's favourite square for an attacking knight, and it seemed like such a natural move indeed to play knight f5 in this position. An incredibly natural looking move, and maybe some overexcitement or some fear crept in, and maybe Alexander Shabalov would have played this move against other players. It does seem just incredibly strong to play knight f5. Just to show you, knight f5, you know, what does black do? If he castles, knight takes h6. What does black do there? It just seems like a worse position, basically. This position here, it just seems worse for black. And it's a little bit strange it wasn't played, basically. Yeah, maybe if king f8's needed, that's not a great thing. But yeah, it seems as though here black was like taken off the hook with queen f5. Now this does contain some concrete ideas, like knight takes c4 using that pin, or bishop takes c4, and it seems, you know, quite aggressive in to put the queen here. But we see this calm reply queen b6 now, and it seems maybe white felt this was an improvement on having the queen on c2 to still play knight f5 check now by vacating the f5 square. So we have king f8, and now we have potentially on the cards knight f5, but first rook d6 was played, which also seems very good, double attacking the queen and knight. So Wesley has to resort to this pin here, queen c7, to safeguard against rook takes f6. So if rook takes f6, queen takes, knight takes, bishop takes. So that's not on the cards at the moment. And this pin is actually kind of tricky. So even though, you know, white played that double attack, but going into a self pin, it's sometimes not advisable. And now an unthinkable collapse occurs very rapidly from this position. From what was previously a very, very promising position, white plays now knight f5, which looks very tempting now because it kind of safeguards the rook. It's threatening immediately things like knight takes g7, for queen takes f6 after the king had to take. That'd be check. But there's a real bone crushing move in this position. Can you see what black can do? And really, white has really fluffed up this game. In my view, I don't know about you guys, but white could have had a great position earlier. But now with this pin, this self pin, it's a very, very big penalty, as this next move demonstrates. So if I give you 5 seconds here, what would you play with black? So 5 seconds starting from now. Okay, knight e8, it hits the queen, it hits the rook as well, it protects g7. Yeah, this is tactically crushing. White tries knight takes g7, apparently with, you know, potentially a clever idea of knight e6 check for queen takes h8. But black is not obliged to play knight takes d6 here. That would allow knight e6 check and queen h8, just to show that if black plays this, check, and then we're winning this rook. No, that's not necessary. Black just plays queen takes d6, and this doesn't work at all well now. Knight e6 check is played, but now, can you guess? Very calm move. If I give you 5 seconds, it's the final move of the game. Okay, king g8, yeah. The knight is defending against any mate on g7. Black's just the exchange up here. It would just be the exchange up. So White resigns. Yeah, it's a bit of a tragic game, I think. I think White did have a good position. His whole play lead up for d5 break to weaken that f5 square was great. The issue, he self pinned. That's the main issue. Don't self pin, even if there's like some lucrative double attacks. This game could be evidence that you've got to be very, very careful with the forcing moves, not to go into any sort of self pin. It proved absolutely fatal for White in this game, that self pin. But yeah, very, very calm, resourceful play from Wesley in actually it seemed like a technically worse position from the opening. But yeah, very interesting encounter. A bit of a tragedy for White, I think. But okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.